As the movie opens, footage of military fighting in El Salvador is shown. The scene then cuts to Elaine, a reporter, and her photographer Alma Guerrero, and they're in the jungle of Murzan, Central America. And this is in 1982, and they are there because they're with a band of guerrilla fighters, and they come across dead and burned bodies, and while the photographer goes to the place and takes some photos, the reporter kneels down to write notes on the scenario. The journalist's voiceover takes stage as she expresses her concern and inquires about the war. Suddenly, the building they were in falls under attack by armed forces, and the leader sends the two journalists alone to San Salvador. Elena quickly telexes her story back to her paper, and they hurry to the small plane and manage to fly away just before the armed troops stop the plane. And fast forward to 1984, Elena joins a lunch conference with the Secretary of State, George Shultz, but she arrives late. And nevertheless, Shultz grants her the last question, and she tries to corner him on the Nicaraguan situation. And Shultz deflects and glances over to Trent Morrison, and after asking Morrison what's going on, he warns him not to let it blow up, making Nicaragua as a cancer in their landmass. And later, Elena calls her daughter Kat at a boarding school, and Elena has returned from the West Coast, where she attended her mother's funeral. They have a warm chat, and Elena tells her daughter that the funeral wasn't that difficult because of her and how thankful she is for having her. And then the scene shifts to editor Stuart James of the Atlantic Post's office. He tells Elena that he will not reopen the El Salvador office due to pressures from higher authority. Elena is furious with the updates and she struggles to accept this. And he assigns her to this Reagan re-election campaign, but she first refuses and tells him that there's already a lot of journalists on that case, but Stuart has frozen the entire desk that will work the South American case. Elena leaves his office and she returns to her desk and she finds Alma. And Alma tells her to use the new role to her advantage as it gets her closer to many things. And then Elena's father Dick calls and invites her to Madison, a bar. Elena goes there and they haven't been in touch for some time, and Dick is surprised to hear of Elena's updates. Elena explains her life since he left. She put herself through university, married, had a daughter, divorced, breast cancer, cross-country relocation, and a lot of other stuff. And she doesn't really know much about her father, especially what he does. The only thing that she knows is that he works in supply chain. And Dick says that his partner, Epperson, has just left the business and everything is running pretty smoothly. He's moving product 3 times his former speed, and he asks her about his granddaughter and tells her that he couldn't reach his former wife because of her new husband. However, Elena starts talking about her mother and how she passed away. And upon hearing this, as a remorse, Dick recalls their happy life in Havana before the revolution and how happy the entire family was. The scene then shifts to Elena on a plane as she travels with the Reagan campaign across the country. She's bored and she's not really fitting in, and she tries to avoid the young journalists. And they start moving from Kansas City to other cities, and a lot of crowds that support Reagan start showing up. And in Cincinnati, at a birthday party for George Shultz's wife, Helen, Ellen manages to attend thanks to Helen's introduction to George. However, he dismisses her without any comments. She persists in asking him questions, but his guards dismiss her and ask her to reschedule for a proper questionnaire. And she leaves there after wishing his wife a happy birthday. And later at the State Department, Threat explains that Elena is a dogged reporter who managed to get in with the Frabundo Marti Liberation Front and knows all about Central America. He argues that she could be useful as a bullhorn. However, the senator's staffer, Berquest, opposes the idea of using third parties. And Shultz ends up siding with Threat, stating that it is in the best interest of the State Department, and it's also the State Department's responsibility. In Houston, a weary Elena rests her head in her motel room, and she finds this envelope under her bed, and inside is a bunch of photos of her father. And a sticky note under one of the photos warns her to back off. And then, during a concert, she meets an old source, General Gus, and she shows him the photos and he explains that they're all weapons. He then gives her a tip that the surplus National Guard weapons are actually being sold in Central America through Miami. And then Elena decides to call Stuart, wanting to get on the Nicaraguan case, and she tells him the situation is on fire and that it's very newsworthy, but he stresses that the election polls are more important, refusing to let her shift her roles. And afterwards, she takes another call regarding her father, who is claimed to be in a critical medical condition. And then Elena shows up to see her father at the hospital in Miami, and she calls and tells her friend at work that she'll be out for some time, and when she arrives, she finds Dick showing some signs of dementia. He asks her for help in dealing with Epperson, and to bring him some comfort, she promises to take care of his business. And later, Elena goes to Dick's house even though the neighbor told her that he wasn't there. She goes inside and she grabs a cigarette, And she proceeds to clean the house, and she finds some beer in the fridge, and she starts making herself at home, and she starts crying as well. And after a shower, she finds an old hat box with all of her childhood snapshots. And after Dick is given a mental test and discharged from the hospital, he explained that he borrowed $500,000 from some rough types, and they're hoping to make $1 million when he finally pays them off. Elena then calls Alma to have her look into Max Epperson, and the next day she goes to the marina and she waits by Dick's boat called Kitty Rex in Florida. And this guy called Barry watches her from afar, and then he approaches her and offers her a smoke, and he asks about Dick's health. Barry explains that he's arranged for her to meet someone at the Clipper Club, the first-class Pan Am lounge at the airport. And Elena waits and observes the various people in the lounge, including a man in a white suit who chats on his phone about El Salvador and $92 million, and another Latin man in a cowboy hat and a gold necklace who watches her from the bar. And Barry warns her not to compromise anyone who thinks something is off, so she heads back home. And then we learn that Dick wants to retire, and he wants to take his boat to Key Largo, and he asks her to fly down and make the collection for him. And Elena goes to the warehouse area to meet Barry, who's very unhappy with her, and he shows her a bunch of cartons and cases of weapons, and he instructs her to just get the money. And back at home, Dick is very worried, and he tells her to mention Max Epperson if anything goes wrong, and he says that she doesn't need to pack because she's not gonna stay there for long. And Elena promises him she will do as he says, and she leaves. And at midnight, she boards an unmarked cargo plane and she flies away. And as Elena lands at the airstrip, she immediately wants to get paid for her delivery of the automatic rifles, but a young man insists on inspecting the goods and asks Elena to open the box using a crowbar. And she reveals the rifles inside, and he seems pretty happy, and he starts singing a song even. And then they decide to test the anti-personnel mine on a dog from another box. And the mine explodes upon contact, proving that everything that she brought works properly. And despite completing the delivery, the man refuses to pay her and simply walks away, leaving Elena empty-handed and very pissed off. And suddenly, a group of motorcycles arrive and a man drops a suitcase filled with kilo bags of white powder at her feet. And the pilot warns her that he's leaving in 2 minutes. Elena then decides to take the bag and she rushes to find someone to pay her. She encounters a young man named Jones playing solitaire in his office, and there she demands her payment. But he seems carefree and uninterested about this whole situation, and this causes Elena to threaten him with Mike Epperson's involvement. And as the plane flies away, Jones offers to help Elena and he takes her for a drive to a Sandinista village, and there she takes photos of the locals and the soldiers. Overhearing someone asking Jones why he brought her here, Elena gets suspicious and she pulls a gun on Jones. And because she was really suspicious, she fires a warning shot to let him know that she's not screwing around, and then she gets Jones out of her car. And much later, Elena arrives in the town of San Jose in Costa Rica, where she purchases local clothing and she checks into a hotel after leaving the Jeep, and she still has the bag that they gave her from the airstrip. She calls Alma from a phone booth to discuss Mike Epperson and learns about a man named Bob, who's suspected to be a CIA agent and who's also spotted to show up in many dangerous situations. Elena gives her passport to the hotel clerk and receives a phone call from Barry, and he's apparently tracked her down, and he explains that getting the $1 million payment and traveler's check will take some time because of the paperwork involved. And Elena was not convinced by Barry's explanation, and she mocks his proposal to arrange a plane ticket for her to go back home. And as Alma interviews Trent Morrison in the USA, he claims that they're fighting communism. However, when Alma asks him about the secret cargo flights to Costa Rica, he denies any knowledge, suggesting that it's unofficial. And after spending the night smoking and lying against the wall, Elena wakes up to find an envelope under the door containing a passport and an airplane ticket. And she takes a cab to the airport, and as she was shuffling forward in line, she realizes that the passport and ticket belong to an Elise Myers. When somebody slips a mysterious passport under your door, you have to check whose it is. You don't just go to the airport. Jeez. And at customs, the taxi driver she used to come up says that she forgot her bag and brings it to her, but she rejects it. And as the agent reads the name on the bag to be Dick, and when he inquires her name and she tells him that it's actually Elise, Elena slips away from the confusion as the taxi driver is put under custody due to the bag having a lot of cocaine inside. And meanwhile, Alma looks for Dick in Miami in front of a hospital, but a nurse tells her that he's been taken back to another hospital. And Schultz meets with Morrison, and while they were having dessert together and also reading his personal file, he tells him that he has a beautiful future ahead, and he advises him to take care, and he advises Threat to let Berquest continue with his side project while putting down Berquest as only a House congressman at best. And elsewhere, we see Berquist giving a Hispanic man a bundle of cash. And afterward, Schultz uses a metaphor to advise Threat to finish everything on his plate. And Elena, who's made her way to Antigua, takes a cab to the Ramada, and she calls Kat to apologize for her absence while the man from the Pan Am Clipper Club watches the Ramada from his car. And Elena then checks in at the Intercon Hotel, and while chilling at the outside of the beach reading a newspaper, Elena sees an obituary item and she is shocked. It belongs to a Richard McMahon, and he died under the care of his physician at the age of 64. Shocked by the reading, she goes to the US Embassy, but it was closed for the 4th of July, and the guard refuses to help her replace her lost passport. Elena then sits alone at the Intercon bar having a drink and supper, and Trent Morrison approaches her knowing that she has problems with her passport, and he strikes up a friendly conversation, wondering what she's up to. Elena opens up the Threat, and the two of them leave the bar to get some fresh air. She begins to share more and more with him, and she starts crying at some point. And he reveals that his wife has passed away from cancer, and eventually they end up sleeping together. And Threat offers to help Elena get back home the next day. And Elena heads to the pool area for some relaxation the next morning, but chaos erupts when men with AK-47s start shooting everywhere. And thankfully, Jones calls out her name, and the two of them manage to take cover and scramble to safety. And then he manages to drive her away from the scene. As they flee, the cowboy hat man from the Clipper Club watches and follows them. But with the help of a passing parade, Jones is able to evade their pursuer and get them to safety. And after stopping the car near the ocean, Jones reveals to Elena that Dick has been set up and he was the one that was supposed to be shot. And as they talk, Elena admits that all she has left now is the story, which Jones shows respect for as a combat journalist and offers to let her stay for another couple days. And Elena then calls Alma and asks her to pass a message to her ex to go pick up Kat from school. And Alma informs her that a French intelligence officer is investigating the same case and that the pool shooting was actually intended for her. And upon realizing this, Elaine looks at Jones and she gets very scared and she runs away. Jones chases after her before briefly stopping, and Elena takes a local bus and there she finds a phone to call Kat, and she has a very emotional conversation with her only daughter. And Threat knocks on Elena's door and he arranges a safe place for her. She's dropped off at a rundown beach resort down the coast, where she is welcomed by Paul, who assigns her tasks like getting morning papers and painting lounge chairs. And over time, Elena and Paul spend their nights drinking and conversing, during which Paul shares stories about his past political engagements. And Elena takes notes and writes her own account, and she keeps her journal hidden in her bedroom. And at one point, Paul informs Elena that a friend will be joining them for dinner. And that evening, while Paul was chatting with a very attractive young man who was naked by the pool, Elena sneaks into his office to investigate. And there she comes across a business card belonging to Mark Berquist. She gets spotted by a chambermaid, but Elena manages to play it cool and avoid any suspicion. As the days go by, Elena overhears a conversation between Paul and the man from the beach, where the man mentions driving Castle through a fence. And this phrase triggers memories of her hearing the same phrase at the Sandinista camp, as well as memories of Max Epperson from one of her childhood birthday parties. Elena also recalls the mysterious man in white from the Clipper Club, and she becomes very frightened and she runs away. And although they saw someone running, they're unsure of who it was from a distance. And Elena manages to get to Threat, and she informs him that Bob is there. And after Threat welcomes her, she takes a shower and catches her breath. The next morning, while they were chatting and having a beer by the beach, Threat tells Elena that a plane will take her away the next day at 8 o'clock, and a car will pick her up at 6 p.m. He advises her to be ready with her notes and film. And then, as usual, Elena calls Kat and they have a little chat because she misses her daughter, and as Elena returns to the resort, she notices her room in disarray. And despite the chaos, she discovers that her journal is safe and on the dresser. And eager to find Paul, she makes her way through the resort, and she's unaware that Jones is sulking around with a firearm. And suddenly, a sound of a gunshot echoes through the halls, causing Jones to duck for cover. And in a brief moment of silence, Elena cautiously ventures back to her room, only to find that her journal has vanished without a trace. And in disbelief, she wanders away trying to make sense of the situation, and afterwards, Elena follows Threat's instructions and she waits for him at the destination pickup spot. And as soon as she arrives, Threat emerges from the shadows brandishing a gun, and upon calling her name, without warning, he fires 2 rounds into Elaine's left chest, sending her tumbling off the cliff and into the ocean below. And as she falls, Elena struggles to comprehend what's going on and what just happened. And in the aftermath of the tragedy, the other parties involved begin to tell their side of the story. Threat falsely implicates Elena and expresses confusion as to why she turned on him, and Jones gives his superiors in Paris a verbal account of the events, stating that Elena was merely caught in the crossfire, and finally, Alma receives Elena's journal from Jones and is seen using a typewriter to type up the story stating how the covert organized system of the US government indirectly arms direct violations via sale of surplus military arms to the so-called Contras against the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. And meanwhile, Kat is seen crying and anxiously waiting for Elena's call, unaware of the horrifying events that have transpired. And she's eventually taken away from her seat at the cell phone by an old lady. And the movie comes to a close with a chilling image of Elena plummeting into the sea, with her voiceover explaining the surprising nature of human life. And that's how our movie ends, boys and girls. I hope you guys enjoyed our recap. Remember to leave a like, leave a comment. I'll see you guys on the next recap. Bye.